Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. As many of you know, the sighting reports come in constantly here at BBR. And even though we share the reports consistently and as often and as quickly as we can, there will inevitably always be a backlog of events needing to be shared, investigated and documented. To give you a small example of this first report was taken on the 2nd of October 2019. And it had happened in the spring of that year. But in some ways, this backlog works in our advantage. During the waiting period, many more personal experiences and evidence finds come in, and we are able to see patterns within these reports, not only in the facts of the experience or the description of the creature seen, but also in the areas and even in the witnesses themselves, believe it or not. There are also similarities in the events that happen and what the witness was doing at the time. Many reports even start with the same sentence. They can be that similar. And there are often a pattern of similarities in the lives of the people who experience these events or had a very real interest in the subjects themselves. This happens throughout all of the genres and different subjects that myself and the team of investigators cover, not just in the creature reports. There are witnesses to UFO experiences and alien life who tell me the same set of circumstances they've gone through in life that I hear from all of the others. And the sightings and experiences they have are like peas in a pod. I also know numerous witnesses who have had paranormal or unusual events happening at home. As each event is accepted, the more the activity ramps up. Their life experiences are an exact copy of many others. There are the darker subjects like entities that visit females and males of a certain age. In fact, in many cases from the same generation. They speak of nightly visits, remembered from childhood, teens and even the present. In many of the cases I cover, there can be an ongoing through the generations aspect to these events. I've even had it suggested that it can run in bloodlines. But for today, I'd like to take a look at some of the Bigfoot reports that have come into BBR in the hopes that you can spot many of the parallels, and I will bring you witness reports of all of the things that I've mentioned in the coming weeks. But the reports I bring you today are a prime example of this repeated pattern. And I hope in sharing them with you, you too can spot the glaring similarities. Each report was sent in by a witness who does not know any of the other witnesses who've reported. Yet I am hoping if they are here today with us, they may get a good idea of just how unalone they really are. One day, if I could have one of my wishes, I would love to bring all of these people together in one place. No doubt, if that ever happens, they'll be finishing each other's sentences not too far into the conversation. And perhaps you yourself may recognise something from these reports that will make you reevaluate a situation you had or that you're aware of. Bigfoot type creature seen by a dog walker, October 2019. Hi Deb, I mentioned on the live chat my Bigfoot encounter. And due to the easy experience of sharing, I now feel able to share this event more freely. My memory, unfortunately, isn't good at remembering precise dates. I was walking my dog in our local park in spring this year, 2019. We were about 3/4 of the way around our walk, and we got to the section of the park where there are head-high bushes to the right of us, and there are about 10 trees between the bushes and the path we were walking on. To the left of us, there are several large oak trees and they're spread out across about 500 yards. The path splits into two and you can go towards the road or carry on around the park, which is roughly half a mile from that point. As me and my very old dog, who is 15, were about 50 yards from the fork in the path, I looked to the right where there are two sweet chestnut trees. These trees are around 15 feet apart, and their trunks are a good 10 inches across. Standing next to the tree nearest to us was a tall, 7-footish, hair-covered something. What that something was, I cannot explain. It was a golden brown colour. It had a slim body, it wasn't bulky. It was sideways onto us, facing towards the bushes. I looked at my dog, who was on my left-hand side, to see if he'd noticed it, but he was sniffing the floor completely unaware. Mind you, he is 15 and he may not have heard, seen or smelled the visitor beside the trees. I just walked on in amazement really, not fear. As I looked back to the same area to check if he was following, the hairy one had gone. I couldn't see how it had vanished so quickly, as the trees there are just hawthorn and lime. I should have been able to see him. The bushes were too far for a person to get behind in the few short seconds that had happened while I'd been looking away. I do have some photos of stick leans before and since this event, but I cannot believe I saw Bigfoot on our park. Now this situation, taken at first glance, seems to be out of the ordinary. A woman walking a dog on an ordinary thing people do every day when she sees something impossible in the local park and nature reserve. This surely has to be a one-off event. An 8-foot biped, slightly slouched forward, seen by a dog walker in Sale. When I had a dog, I would get up early morning and walk it before work, probably about 6 a.m. This morning was not unusual. I'd walked to Walton Park in Sale, M33, which is not too far from my house. It was just getting light, and there was a light dusting of snow on the ground. So even though everything was silhouetted, the thing I saw stood out against the white background. I had walked through the main entrance, and after a few seconds of looking forward straight ahead, I noticed what seemed to be an 8-foot biped was how I would describe it. It was standing on 2 legs, and it was slightly bent forward in the upper body. It started to casually walk across the bowling green. It took big paces, and it did not seem to be any rush at all. It walked diagonally away from where I was standing, and it seemed to be just going about its business. I kept watching it until my view of it was obstructed by the trees. At that moment, one of the usual dog walkers I see often entered the park and caught up with me. I turned around and I wanted to ask, did you see that? Did you see what that was? Who that was? What that was? But for some reason I didn't. I just kept it to myself and stayed silent. It was about 30 feet away from me when it walked straight past me. We did the usual walk around and I gave the dogs a run, by which point it became light mostly, and I saw nothing else. The dogs didn't seem worried. I neither felt scared or threatened, but I think I probably should have done. I saw this huge thing which appeared to be all black in colour, and it walked a bit bent over. It was sort of slouched with longer than human arms. The way it looked is what convinced me it wasn't normal. This is a really quiet, chilled area which backs onto the canal. I never saw it again, but I thought you'd want to know. The Beulah Ape Man, 1984. In a small town park in the district of Salford, a dog walker saw a strange, hairy and slouched creature watching her from the trees. It was one winter's evening around 5 p.m. in January of 1984 when the lady took her dog for his daily walk in the park. Something they did often. Until this event, nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened to them before. They walked the normal path they had followed so many times, and as they got closer to the old mansion house, past the toilet block where the overgrown shrubbery was, out of the corner of her eye, the dog walker noticed a strange figure watching her. The witness stated, I was 30 years old back then, in 84, and I was walking my dog there in Beulah, and it was freezing cold, and I was standing there having a cigarette. It was dark at that time of the year, 5 p.m. Thought I was alone in the park, as it's usually shut then, but this particular night it was still open. I was smoking when movement off to the left caught my eye. There was a nearby light and I saw this tall thing there. It looked to be about 6 feet tall and it was quite podgy. It had a bit of a belly on it. What got me right away was that it was barefoot. And it was then that I noticed it was completely nude. It had no clothing on it at all, but it did have hair all over its body. That's when I thought it must be someone playing silly beggars. But this thing just stood there. I saw it had male genitalia, and that was when I became worried. I thought it might run at me and attack me. It stood there staring at me for about 20 seconds, and then it turned very quickly and ran off into the trees. I quickly left the park and returned home. I told my then boyfriend and his brother, but they left it off. I just kept it quiet. I just kept the whole event quiet for years. I will never forget that thing. I did not know anything about Bigfoot and stuff like that back then, but that's what it must have been. And to learn someone else saw it in the same trees was startling, but I just kept quiet about my experience. I would never forget it. It looked like a chimp, but with the body shape of a man. It couldn't have been a monkey because it was too tall, and it looked like a caveman from dinosaur days. It had a piggy type of nose and large black eyes. It was full of brown hair everywhere, and it had a human's face. But it was also like a chimp's. It is hard to explain in words what it was. The Black Country Stalker at Woody Park, 2018. In Baggeridge Country Park, there's an area called the Ridge. This area has a horseshoe-shaped path that follows a tree line in a half circle. The path's only single file, not very wide, with trees on both sides of it. One side of the path falls downhill and the other side has a slight incline, and it's very quiet there. Very few people use it as it's off the beaten track. One morning, a lady and gentleman who walked their dog on the path, as the dog's not great with others. It's a place they use often, and they did so on this morning. They witnessed a strange creature at the halfway point on the path. It was 9:30 a.m, and as they were walking along, the man noticed a dark figure in the trees, which was around 30 feet away from them. He thought it was strange as the figure seemed to be watching them from behind a tree. Then it would duck back in behind the tree, and every time it was noticed it'd do the same thing. The man decided not to say anything to his wife because he didn't want to alarm her. They continued to walk, but the figure stayed around the same pace as them and continued to try to remain hidden. It would duck in and out of the tree line as it watched them walk. After around 10 minutes had passed, the man's wife noticed he seemed anxious and asked what the matter was, and he told her what he'd seen and pointed the figure out. She eventually spotted it and also saw it ducking back in and out as if it was peeping at them from behind the trees it was hiding behind. The dog then started barking and growling at it. The couple rushed off as best they could with the dog now on the lead and eventually reached the fork in the path, and they chose the one which would take them straight back to the car park. As the couple turned at the bottom of the path that leads out of the woods and onto the open fields, they stopped to catch their breath. And as they looked back from where they were and where they'd come from, the creature had stepped out onto the open path. They both agreed it stood upright, was very dark in colour and covered in hair. The wife said it was around 8 feet tall, but the gentleman said it was closer to 7 feet. They went on to add that it didn't follow us any further. And they got back to the car, and it spooked them that much that they no longer walk the dog in that area anymore. By now, you are surely thinking there can be not any more stories of dog walkers who experience strange creatures left for me to report. Would it surprise you to know we have only lifted one corner of the book, the very tip of the iceberg, so to speak. The Bigfoot of Bramham, 1999. A gentleman out one evening walking his dog around the area of Branham Park in Yorkshire. He did this walk on a regular basis. He'd not had a problem before this event. His walk was at dusk on a winter's evening. There were fields on the estate, woodlands and hedgerows along the walk, and the dog was off the lead exploring those spots. The witness says, myself and the dog were just walking along. I let the dog off the lead so he could have a run. I was about half a mile up this single farm track by then, and there was no animals or people around. So I let him off lead and let him have a sniff around. As I walked, the dog's just doing his own thing. It was quiet, with no sound of anyone around. I was enjoying the walk. There are hedges on both sides of the track the whole way, so it's hard to see clearly into the trees. And there are some woods to one side of me. And as we walked even further along the track, the dog suddenly stops. He freezes and he looks up the track in the direction that we're walking. He must be aware of something up there as he starts growling and acting all strange. His hackles are up and he growls continuously. At that point, I'm thinking it must be a fox, which is the way it acted before, to be honest, if we ever came across one. So I'm looking at the track to try and see a fox, but I can't see anything anywhere. No fox, no cat, no other animal. I can see how worked up he is though, and now he's going mad and he starts barking loudly. I had carried on walking, so by this point he was a short way behind me. So I turned to the dog to try and calm him, but he won't stop. If anything, he's getting worse. Something has really spooked him, so I turned to look at the track and I couldn't believe my eyes. Standing there, looking at us, was this thing. A massive creature, and it was just stood there looking back in our direction. It must have walked between 8 to 9 footsteps out onto the field track before I'd even seen it. And now I can see it, and I can see it clearly. And it can clearly see us. At this point, I'm in complete shock at what I'm seeing. I kept thinking, it can't be real. It can't be real. I honestly don't think my brain could process what I was seeing, because standing there in the field track was a huge creature of some kind. It was massively built, and I would say it was about 5 foot wide across the shoulders and about 8 feet tall. I couldn't make out any facial features as the face was in shadow, but I could make out that it was covered in hair. It was standing about 30 metres or so away from me, and I could see it clearly, but I could not make out any features even from that distance. It made no sound, and I never smelt or heard anything at the time. It, however, did look quickly to its left, as if warning something else not to come out of the tree line. To my disbelief, at that moment, the dog ran straight towards it. The dog's barking as he runs in that direction, and it does nothing. But the dog stopped about 15 metres away from it. He was clearly scared and just didn't know how to react. He had completely forgotten about me, and that's a first for my dog. Usually we would put my needs first, and maybe that was what he was doing, as he was now in between me and this creature. But I could tell I was the last thing on my dog's mind at that point. The dog barks a few more times, and then he turns and runs straight past me and back up the farm track to safety the way he'd come in. No doubt now you can imagine how stunned I was. The whole incident only lasted a few seconds, and I just stood there paralysed, trying to process what I'd just seen. I just didn't know what to do. I was completely crapping myself. I think I just acted without thinking. I never looked back up that track, and I just followed the dog until I met up with him, put him on the lead, and we went home. I had no idea what a Bigfoot was back then. Now, years on, you see them online, and I can say, without doubt, it looked like an exact match. I can think of a number of cases that are very similar to that one. A gentleman in the Afan Forest who has a number of dogs, quite a large pack of dogs, and they are very large dogs, and they pull, so he has to take them out in a relay. And on a number of occasions, the dogs have acted very strangely, and at one point actually cowered behind him because he wouldn't pass a certain area within the shrubbery. And he said that the dog would never do that. Normally that they would put his safety before their own. So whatever was in there, they were absolutely terrified of. And you hear that over and over again. A couple see Bigfoot in Ballybola, Northern Ireland, 1998. Caroline Bream, a 63-year-old woman who works as a pet sitter in Glenwera, said she and her husband were walking some of the local dogs in Ballybola Forest when the creature was seen by them both. Mrs. Breen stated, "We were walking the dogs, and as we approached a small patch of dead trees, we caught sight of something crouched behind the bushes. We thought at first it was a human hiding there trying to stay unseen. But as it raised its head in the air, we saw it clearly. The dogs got agitated," she added. Mrs. Breen says her husband walked towards the creature and that it began growling at him. "I told him to step back, but he ignored me," she said. "He thought it was a chimpanzee or something. He moved closer and closer to it, and when he was in about 15 feet of it or so, it reared up on its legs. It was very tall, and it was carrying a stick. The creature then smashed the stick against a tree a number of times, and it took off running at high speed." Mrs. Breen says the ordeal lasted only about 4 minutes. It ran so fast through those trees, like it had done so 1,000 times before. The creature was described as having chimpanzee-like face, but with a broader nose, and it was covered in dark brown black fur. Mrs. Breen recalls the animal being approximately 8 feet tall. "I don't know if this was a Bigfoot, but my husband didn't think we got those type of things in Ireland," she said. And Mrs. Breen, who'd previously laughed at other stories from the woods her mother had told her about in the past, says she now knows there is a weird ape roaming in the woods of the British Isles because she's seen it. Large figure by the bushes, Isle of Grain, January 2019. My wife had a potential sighting on Monday the 21st of the 1st, 19, when she was out walking our dog on their usual route. As they were coming close to the railway embankment, the dog reacted to a strange figure that my wife thought she also saw. This happened when she was on a farm in our horse's field. My wife said, "I saw a large figure by the bushes in front of the railway embankment. It was a very large thing, and as she looked up to get a better look, it ducked into the bushes and disappeared. My dog saw it at the same time as my wife," he said. "The dog went nuts and ran to the spot where the thing had been. If something she never does with people normally, and it was very out of character for her." A wild man's whoop and a green dog, November 2017. I was contacted today by a gentleman, and he asked me if any of our researchers are out on an investigation in the Holway Woods area of Dorset. I advised Mr. B that none of our teams were out there this weekend. In fact, I checked amongst the Dorset researchers and nobody had been out to that area that we know of. Mr. Breen went on to explain, "I decided to take the dog out for a run today and we set off in the car. We arrived at Holway Woods and everything was quiet and it was a normal cold wet day. I didn't see anyone else out there and there were no people around and no cars in the car park when I arrived. But I'd only been out of the car for a few minutes when I heard what I can only describe as a whoop. It stood out to me as unusual, and I turned around expecting to see people behind me, but nobody was back there. The whoop, it just stood out as unusual. I looked around some more to find the source, but I still couldn't see anyone anywhere. I decided to whoop back. Why? I don't know, but I just did it, in a much deeper voice than normal. But all was quiet, no reply or response, no further whoop. It was puzzling, but I just went on with the walk. Then I noticed what I thought at first was a greeny grey dog running down below me among the trees. I couldn't make it out clearly at any point. All I can say is it was an animal with hair or fur in a very strange colour moving down below the trees and the brush. I waited for the owner to walk with it, or at least catch up to it at some point, but there was nobody around, and the dog had gone. To be honest, I was feeling a bit spooked at this point, so I went back to the car and went home. I think he was hoping it was one of the investigators in a ghillie suit. But as I say, I checked and we didn't have anybody out in that area at all. The golden dog-like creature, Pebworth, 1991. I had a strange encounter once in the Cotswold countryside, said the witness. I was out walking the dog and just strolling along the fields and lanes when a large animal decided it was coming to see me. Well, I should say, that's how it felt at the time. We had just been stood there looking at each other from afar for some time and my dogs had run ahead. As this thing loped towards me, I was suddenly afraid. I wanted to back up, so I called my dogs who came running. They're just two small fox terriers, but they were enough that this animal changed direction and ran off. I don't know what the animal I saw today was. I can't place it. It resembled a rather large ginger dog. And as I was walking, it felt like I was being observed from the tree line. I kept looking around trying to spot what was making me feel this way. Afterwards, I realised it was watching me from a couple of fields away. And this was when I sensed I was being watched. And I stood for some time looking for the watcher. I stood there quietly until finally I saw a gingery head above the long grass. And I sensed it knew that I'd seen it. I couldn't think what it was, and we stared at each other for some time, sort of communicating, until it decided to lope towards me. As it approached, of course, I suddenly realised just how big it was, and that's when I decided I'd like to be in a safer environment when it finally got to me. It was when it saw my dogs that it just veered off and changed course. I felt it had trusted me and I'd let it down, to be honest. I still can't identify what sort of animal it was, though. Now, there's a lot of talk of a black panther in that area, and what I saw definitely wasn't a black anything. But there is one account of a sandy brown animal thought to be a lynx, which might just fit the bill. I would hazard a guess it was 91 when I saw this strange creature. It still sends chills down my back. I walk my dogs around there most days and I never saw another soul. And I particularly liked it when it was misty. And boy, does it get misty down there. My feeling was that it wasn't a cat. It looked more like a very big dog thing. It's strange that a wild animal would want to come towards me. They just don't behave like that. Even enough that it would come out of cover to get closer to me. It just doesn't make sense. And then be scared off by two little dogs. This thing never rose up or anything. It stayed on four legs at all time. I won't go back to the ridge, 2019. My wife and I had a strange experience on the 23rd of the 4th, 19. We were walking in a wooded area known as the Ridge, which is a mile from Liphook on the Hampshire-West Sussex border. We were out with our two dogs around 7:30 p.m. when we heard two loud wood knocks close to us. There was no one around that I could see. Our dogs did not react to the noise at first, but within 5 minutes they were running through the undergrowth frantically, as if trying to flush something out. This is completely out of character, as they're usually very obedient, but it took us a while to get them to come to us. We heard or saw something else during the walk. I have recently seen a tree structure close to the area of our earlier events. The green branch has been twisted and it's at least 12 feet high, and it's been tucked under a branch growing parallel. It reaches the ground where you can see a large rotten branch laid over, keeping it down, almost pinned. This cannot be storm damage or kids messing around. It is obviously contrived, but for what reason I don't know. Further to my recent investigations near the ridge, I've had to admit a defeat due to the psychological effects it's had on myself and my dog. This has made me realise the impact these creatures can have is significant once they realise they're being studied. I have experienced awful feelings when down there, and my dog Dave has behaved totally out of character on several occasions. He will constantly turn back, barking and running at me, trying to turn away. We set up a trail camera last summer, which constantly malfunctioned on site, but worked fine at home. I don't mind showing someone where to go if they want to check it out, but I won't go back there again. The dog acting strange, Aberdare, 2016. I have a young pup, and we were out this morning, and something happened that I can't explain. It was a bit of a strange one this morning whilst out training the pup. We went to a new place on our walk, and I took her high up on the mountain. There's a thick conifer plantation with wild, open heathland, lots of white grass and reeds and sedges, ideal to run her in. Anyway, I parked up the car, and I walked the short distance up to the forestry track. We did a few simple retrieves into the woods, etc., and all was going fine. We went out onto the heathland and had a lovely training session, but then it all went funny. I sent Teal out for a nice mark retrieve. She picked it up, no problem at all. But then, on her way back to me, she just stopped dead in her tracks. She spat the dummy out and started staring and growling into the woods just behind me. Now, anybody who knows Teal will know her only downfall is her obsession with retrieving. Nothing else matters until that dummy is in her hand. Is in my hand, sorry. So for her to stop and actually spit that dummy out, I knew something wasn't right. I just couldn't work out what it was. After a little while and some encouragement, I got Teal to come into me and we moved to another area to do a bit more. But she was having none of it, and it just seemed she was so unsettled. I decided to call it a day, and on the way back to the car through the forestry track, I decided to give her another simple dummy on the inside of the wood, just to try and end on a high note. But she was not interested at all. She would go out and stop just short of the tree line and stand there pacing, looking into woods, but she wouldn't step in further. So I ended up picking up the dummy myself. It was a funny old morning that Teal and I had. Now this experience happened in Chilham, some strange structures and howls, September 2016. This experience happened one day in the woods, just to the southeast of the village where I live. That day I was walking my dog when I came upon a clearing with a number of hut-like structures. I couldn't get close up to them to photograph them because of a barbed wire fence between me and them. Also, I didn't have my phone on me. On the way out, I heard a very loud wood knock coming from deeper inside the trees, though not from where the structures were. About 20 minutes later, I heard a weird mumbling coming from the same area. This mumbling freaked me out. It freaked me out enough that I got the hell out of there and I haven't been back since. The second weird event happened the other night when my mother and I were sat in the garden by the fire. We were coming from the direction of the same forest. We heard screaming that sounded almost identical to something I've heard on YouTube. I lived my whole life in the countryside, so I know what a fox and an owl sounds like, and I've never heard anything like this before. Mud Balls and Structures, Wales, 2018. Hi Deborah, I found your site after talking to a friend and telling him about some things I've witnessed whilst out dog walking in the countryside where I live. I like to take my dogs to a secluded area, out of the way tracks and trails where they can roam, and not your normal quick dog walk route. And I started walking a wood off in the Govilon Wales Canal in North Wales. I've probably got that completely wrong. I think it's South Wales as well. Once you get into the woods and leave the pass behind, it's just natural land for miles. Well, we were out this day, and while we were walking along, me and my girlfriend had a few stones land beside us. One stone after another, they would come whizzing out of the trees and land nearby. I really don't know how to explain that. Nobody was around, and we checked, and we couldn't see anybody else. We didn't see anyone on the way in or out, but this stone throwing kept happening. And then a little later, a mud ball the size of a football came crashing through the tops of the trees past us. It landed with a thud close to us, so we decided to head off. We just walked out as quickly as we could, and we didn't see anyone behind us or anyone at all anywhere. I walked it the other day and tried a different route, and I found a small construction of logs, which I thought was a hut someone had made for bushcraft, although a very small one. It was only when my girlfriend's dad showed me photos on here of structures. I compared the one I saw and the ones here, and they looked to be the same. I'm going to keep going back for a look and see if anything's out of place, and I'll send in anything I come across that's unusual. I must apologise for my terrible pronunciation of the town where you live. I'm not very good with Welsh. The Langley Ford Watcher. There's a hill called Hedgehope, and it's in the Cheviots. It and the Cheviot Hills themselves stand above a little farm called Langley Ford. Anyway, to reach Hedgehope from Langley Ford, you have to go past a couple of crags, then over an isolated and properly desolate moor. Every time I've crossed that moor alone, I've had the sensation of not being by myself. And I've heard out-of-face footsteps behind me, or behind me that are not mine. The last time I was there a few weeks ago in 2019, one of the dogs I had with me set to furiously barking at absolutely nothing. And she's not that sort of dog at all. I don't know why she started the way she did. It's really not like her at all. So, were the ladies walking their dogs able to walk right up to those creatures? Because when you listen to the first two reports, it was as if the ladies were doing exactly the same thing over and over again. You listen to the reports from the gentleman, and the dog reacts quite violently, and the atmosphere is completely different than it was for the females. Is it just coincidence that all of these creatures are being seen? You'll have heard the dates when I was reading them out. There's some very recent ones. People out walking the dog. Is it because they're in a state of relaxation? I have no idea, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts on it. Or is it just something along the lines of the creature didn't smell them because they had the dog with them, and that master scent, in the way that they say horse riders are more likely to have an encounter? I don't know, but I'd be interested to know what you think. So, I hope you enjoyed the reports tonight, and I will be back with some more very soon. Keep safe, everyone. Good night.